This is Mike Lear with Missouri Net from our newsroom, where on Tuesday night we'll be covering the presidential preference primary in Missouri. And I'm talking now to Learfield News' political guru, Henderson of Iowa, who is I hesitate to call her my counterpart because I don't think that does her justice. But
Oh, no.
she is the news director for Radio Iowa and is very knowledgeable of all things political. And so we're going to talk to her a little bit about Tuesday's primary. Kay, thanks for your time.
Sure.
Uh, Really, I guess the big question is with any primary is how much does it really mean to the race overall and how much does it mean to the candidates? And given what's happened in the last few weeks in other states and how the delegate count is breaking down, I guess Missouri's is turning out to be pretty meaningful.
Exactly. In some respects, you're going to find out if Missouri is part of the Rust Belt or if you're part of the Bible Belt, if you were. With Bernie Sanders' victory up in Michigan last week, there's now a thought that he does well in so-called Rust Belt states where manufacturing has been heavy, where there have been heavy manufacturing job losses. And he also, curiously, I looked at his schedule, he's going to Columbia, Missouri, which is sort of his modus operandi. He tries to do very well in college and university communities. Obviously, he's trying to run up the score, if you will, in Columbia, and hopefully that will parlay into at least running close to Clinton, if not trying to defeat her in another one of these sort of Rust Belt states. The only polling that I've seen, and you've been looking at the polling far more closely than I have, but the polling that I have seen really doesn't show you or give you an inkling of what may happen in the race. There's a poll out today which I think has a margin of error of 7% on one race, and on the other party's race has a margin of error of 8%. It showed that Clinton had a small lead in Missouri. The other thing, when I was looking at their campaign schedules, Clinton and Ted Cruz are going to St. Louis, which is really smart because it's right on the border. Missouri is going to vote at the same time that the folks in Illinois does. It's a huge media market. It reaches both states. So that's a wise stop for both of them. Back to the Rust Belt versus Bible Belt. Ted Cruz won his home state of Texas. He won Oklahoma. He won Kansas, hoping, I think, to see if evangelical voters and late deciders, people who have decided that, they cannot support the front runner, might choose Ted Cruz, and this might be another pickup for him on primary night.
And the importance of this election of these various candidates, I think, is evident in the fact that we have seen several of them visiting the state. I think Trump, as you and I speak on this Friday afternoon, Trump has been in St. Louis today. We've had Bill Clinton in the state earlier this week, and you mentioned Sanders and Clinton coming in. Would we be seeing that if this was more in the bag for some of these folks?
No, and historically, there hasn't even been a race at this point in the cycle for Missourians to actually have a real big influence on who the nominee may be. There's been some interesting developments today as we speak. You saw Marco Rubio's spokesman tell everybody in Ohio that had planned to vote for Marco Rubio to vote for Kasich instead. That hasn't happened in Missouri, where you have either one of these fellows saying, hey, let's make this competitive, let's go all the way to the convention. And that's what this is all about. In terms of what's going to happen on Tuesday, obviously you have Kasich pinning all of his hopes on winning his home state of Ohio, and you have Rubio pinning, his political future on winning his home state of Florida. But in Missouri, you could see a scenario where a Ted Cruz win would really sort of maybe change a few of the dynamics and require a longer path to the nomination for Donald Trump.
All right, and it's and I don't know how familiar you are with how Missouri's primary works and how the delegates break down, but it's different between the Democrats and the Republicans, and I think a lot of folks maybe don't understand. Then, first of all, why is that word preference even in there?
Well, and you also have winner take all. So in regards to a Trump victory, if Trump were to get 50 plus one, you correct me if I'm wrong, he'd get all the delegates,
That's right. That's right.
which would be really significant. So again, that may be why you have people like, Rubio and Kasich not saying, hey, trying to throw the ball to the other guy and, vote for this guy. They may want to have that four-way race to deny Trump the 50 plus one threshold.
And then we have the discussion, and I think a lot of people are hearing the term brokered convention,
Mhm.
whether or not, not just Missouri, but all of these primaries could lead
Right.
to brokered convention. What does that mean?
Well, there are two terms out there. Brokered convention, I'll talk about that in a little bit. A contested convention would be one of these four fellows that is going to be on the GOP ballot. Those four people would go to Cleveland, and delegates would choose one of those candidates. A brokered convention would be, again, no one marches into the convention with 1,237 delegates, which is the number that's required to win. And then, you get into horse trading. You get into a scenario where someone like maybe a Mitt Romney would emerge as a consensus candidate, or Condoleezza Rice, or someone from outside the sphere of four people who had spent the past year and a half campaigning.
And that's really the biggest hope for some of these down ticket candidates. When so much attention is on Trump, right? That's really the best hope for some of these other names.
Right. They're hoping that that he's winning, but that he has a ceiling that he can't get beyond. And so then in a contested convention where you would, if you have four candidates, you'd have four ballots, the last one would drop out. And, let's say the last one would be Kasich, then he would endorse, Rubio, and then it would be a three-way race. And then you'd have that last place finisher dropping out and endorsing somebody. And the idea would be that Trump would never pick up people who support Kasich or Rubio or Cruz in that scenario.
And let's talk a little bit about economy too. And this ties directly into what you and I do for a living. Again, the fact that we have these candidates coming to Missouri and some Midwestern states that maybe normally they wouldn't have gone to. Also, their advertising dollars are coming with them because this is more contested, right? We wouldn't be seeing that either.
Exactly. So it's good for your economy. It is interesting in that I'm not sure if once the political scientists get a hold of what's going on in this race in 2016, I'm not sure the advertising has had an impact at all. You had Jeb Bush, I almost said George Bush, but you had Jeb Bush spend over $100 million on his part and the part of his political action committee that was supporting him, the super PAC, and it didn't move his numbers at all. And many of the advertisements that they were running in 2015 were attacking Donald Trump. That didn't do anything to affect Trump's popularity. So this may be a turning point in terms of how effective advertising is in terms of changing voter attitudes, or it could be that Donald Trump is such a unique and unusual candidate that the normal rules just don't apply.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you, how much of this situation is unique to him and how much of it is the evolution of how social media and the 24-hour news cycle play into politics. Do you think, I mean, what do you think? Will we continue to see this trend even if we don't have a Trump 4 years, 8 years from now?
Well, it depends on who emerges as candidates. The one thing about your primary, as I understand it, and you know this far better than I, but Democrats can vote in the Republican primary. Independents can vote in the Republican primary. And Trump has been attracting people who are Democrats or independents, as well as people who haven't voted in a Republican primary in years. So he indeed has turned out to be a unique candidate. He repeatedly talks about building a movement. There was an incredibly subdued debate on Thursday night on CNN with these four fellows who are seeking the Republican nomination, and it was, I guess, interesting in that they all sort of tried to portray themselves as they are, characterized. Oftentimes, our politicians become caricatures. And so Marco Rubio had been, the flamethrower for the past couple of weeks, and he returned to form, optimistic, not throwing a lot of darts at Donald Trump. So I think this is turning out to be a really, really interesting race.
Let's pretend it's Wednesday morning for a moment. Depending on what happens Tuesday night, and I'm not asking you to make predictions there, but depending on how it plays out Tuesday night, what are some possible outcomes Wednesday morning going forward in terms of how much does a victory or a loss mean to Trump? How does a victory or loss mean to, and on down the line, who could this be the most meaningful for, or who's going to potentially have to change strategies after Tuesday night into Wednesday morning?
Well, I think all eyes are on Marco Rubio, not as much on John Kasich. But if Rubio is unable to win Florida, and if he does, like he did last week, finish last, his political future as a candidate in 2016 may be very limited. Kasich, on the other hand, has been making it clear that he's going all the way to Cleveland and is hoping for this contested convention or brokered convention scenario that we talked about earlier. So I'm not sure that a John Kasich loss in Ohio has as much damage to his candidacy as a loss in Florida would have to Rubio. Now, conversely, if both of those folks win in Ohio, their home states, Ohio and Florida, then this thing may go on until May or June.
And that's really something too. I mean, I remember discussions in the last, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, et cetera, about Missouri's primary being where it is, and changes have been made to it in the last few cycles as well, but whether it really meant anything. And now we're talking about primaries going on the next couple of months, having meeting, and we really didn't talk about that in past cycles, have we?
Right. It wasn't, and as recently as 2008, there was a contest on the Democratic side where you had Hillary Clinton continuing through the very end until June before conceding to Barack Obama. But she was continuing on with the thought that these superdelegates, the people we haven't even talked about, would all swing for her. Superdelegates at this point seem to be swinging for her this time in a way that they obviously didn't last time.
All right, and you're right. We haven't even talked about those yet. When do those really start to become the focus, the question mark?
Well, if you look at all the delegate math that you can see online, there are superdelegates that are already pledged. The last time I looked, there were more than 500 who had pledged for her. And that's why if you look at these graphics that show the Clinton versus Sanders delegate count, that's why Clinton has such a significant lead over Sanders right now, because she has a significant share, if not the super majority of superdelegates have pledged to support her at the convention. People like, Claire McCaskill from Missouri.
And you being the political guru, is there anything that I've missed? Is there anything else that we need to talk about that maybe we haven't already?
The other thing is, I think people will be watching to see if Clinton performs as well with, minority voters in your state and, the St. Louis metro and over in Kansas City. President Clinton was over in, former President Clinton, that is, was over in Kansas City campaigning recently. And so I think that will be something that people will watch, as well as the exit polls, which show voter attitudes about these candidates. Who identifies with my problems, who do I trust, and it's interesting to see how that dynamic is playing out on the Democratic side as well as on the Republican side. They'll also be looking at people who self-identify as evangelical voters on the Republican side to see if Trump continues his trend of seeming to, have strong support from all segments of the party: evangelicals, Tea Party people, conservatives, and moderates.
Trying to find the story too, and I wanted to ask you about this. It almost slipped my mind, but Donald Trump recently gave a speech, and I think it was in Iowa, where he was talking about St. Louis, and it got some headlines. I wish I could find the exact quote, but talking about no jobs, no spirit in St. Louis, and yeah, no jobs, no spirit, no anything is the quote here from stlmag.com. There's no anything. Again, I can't ask you to make sense out of Donald Trump. I suppose that's been one of the big stories about him, but it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense going into this primary on Tuesday to be trashing one of the biggest cities in this state.
Um, I don't know the context in which he said that. I don't remember him talking about St. Louis when he was in Iowa. Perhaps he did. One of the things that he has tapped into is voter anger about the loss of manufacturing jobs. So just hearing what that quote may be, that may be indeed about, the loss of blue collar manufacturing jobs in a city like St. Louis.
And now I'm able to pull up the full article here. This is actually a quote from last year.
Okay.
Reportedly, this was in the wake of another shooting in St. Louis, this one involving Mansur Ball Bay, and in the anniversary of the Michael Brown shooting. So that was a little bit of the context of that.
Oh, okay.
But again, just more of the mystique that has been Donald Trump and trying to figure that out, and that's really been that story, hasn't it?
Well, and the thing about it is his supporters are steadfast. He rather famously, before the Iowa caucuses were held in January, said that he could go out on Fifth Avenue in New York City and shoot someone and his people would still be with him. And that's true. They have, by and large, allied themselves with Donald Trump. They think he's a problem solver. They think he's a deal maker. They're tired of traditional politicians in Washington, D.C., and they see him as the alternative to which they can turn for solace and for relief from what they perceive as a system that is not supporting them economically.
All right. Okay. Henderson talking about the presidential preference primary coming up in Missouri on Tuesday and the other primaries that are happening on that same night. And Kay, I think.
How long do you vote? In Iowa, when we vote in a primary, the voting starts at 7 a.m. and ends at 7 p.m. So you have 14 hours to vote. How many hours to vote do you have in Missouri?
Okay, I'm going to confess I'm usually not up at 7 a.m. So it could be 7 a.m., but I know they close at 7. That's usually what I'm paying more attention to.
Right.
We voted by then. But
exactly. Yeah. So we may know before people go to bed who the winner is, unless, of course, it's like the Michigan episode that we had last week where it was a nail biter and most people did not know until they got up the next morning that Bernie Sanders had actually won Michigan.
And to your point, though, we should know probably pretty quick after 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night how things are going to shake out in Missouri. Mm-hmm. And, so hopefully we'll talk to you again here shortly thereafter and see what all this meant and will mean.
Exactly. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Okay, Henderson, this has been Mike Lear for Missouri Net and Radio Iowa on Learfield News.